In the grand halls of palaces and the glittering courts of European royalty, beauty and elegance reigned supreme. Portraits captured the perfection of queens and princesses, flawless faces, shining jewels, and extravagant gowns that seemed to float with grace. But beneath those layers of silk, satin, and lace, there was a hidden world that no painter dared to reveal. A world of discomfort, secrecy, and suffering. Because behind every royal smile was a woman battling one of nature's most human experiences, menstruation, in a time when it was considered unspeakable. During the Victorian era and long before it, periods were treated not as a natural biological function but as something shameful, almost scandalous. Even royal women were not exempt from this stigma. In fact, they often had it worse. Their public image was built on perfection. Every movement, every gesture, every appearance had to radiate poise. There was no room for human weakness. And yet, their bodies still bled, hidden under layers of corsets, petticoats, and crinolines that made even breathing a challenge. Imagine being a queen or princess in the 18th or 19th century. You were expected to attend long ceremonies, sit for hours at banquets, and entertain guests in ornate gowns that weigh over 20 pounds. Now imagine doing that while enduring cramps, fatigue, and the constant fear of blood seeping through fabric worth more than a servant's yearly wages. There were no pads, no tampons, and certainly no privacy. So how did royal women manage? The first and most primitive solution was linen rags. Royal ladies, like most women of their time, used strips of soft fabric folded into layers and tucked between the legs. These were often referred to as clouts, or napkins. Servants would wash and reuse them. Of course, for a queen, these were made of fine linen, sometimes embroidered with initials or royal crests, but the discomfort was the same. They were bulky, unreliable, and had to be changed often, which was nearly impossible under heavy dresses that took hours to put on. Changing those rags required help, and that's where things got even more humiliating. Royal women rarely dressed or undressed alone. They had ladies-in-waiting, chambermaids, and dressers who attended to them daily. When menstruation came, these attendants would discreetly prepare special undergarments or provide clean linen cloths. Everything had to be handled in whispers, hidden from the eyes of male courtiers and even from most of the household staff. The bloody rags were carefully wrapped and carried away to be washed in secret, often burned if they were too soiled to save. This ritual of concealment reinforced the idea that menstruation was something shameful, a royal secret to be buried in silence. But as fashion evolved, so did the complications. The wide-hooped skirts of the 18th century gave way to the towering crinolines of the Victorian era, cages of steel and fabric that made even walking a delicate balancing act. Under these structures, women wore multiple layers of petticoats and drawers, often with a split crotch design, so they could use chamber pots without removing everything. For a menstruating royal woman, this design was both a curse and a necessity. It allowed her to relieve herself without the endless process of undressing. But it also made managing menstrual cloths a logistical nightmare. Many women resorted to wearing a kind of belt, an early version of the menstrual belt. A strip of fabric or leather fastened around the waist with straps or clips to hold the linen in place. These belts could be adjusted for comfort, though comfort was a relative term. Imagine the pressure of a corset squeezing your waist while a stiff belt and soaked cloth press between your legs, all while standing through hours of court ceremonies. The physical strain was immense. Fainting was so common among noblewomen that smelling salts became a fashionable accessory. But often, those fainting spells were not from delicate nerves. They were from pain, blood loss, or sheer exhaustion. What made this experience even more disturbing was the lack of understanding about women's health. Menstruation was surrounded by superstition and ignorance. Many doctors of the time, all male, believed that menstrual blood was toxic or unclean. Some claimed it could spoil food or kill flowers if a woman touched them during her period. Others thought it was a divine punishment for Eve's sin. These beliefs filtered into the royal courts, shaping how even queens were treated. When a royal woman suffered from irregular cycles, cramps, or fainting, physicians often prescribed purges, leeches, or bed rest. There was no concept of reproductive health, only fear and mysticism. Queen Victoria herself left behind diary entries that hint at her discomfort with menstruation. She referred to her unwell days with frustration, describing the inconvenience and pain they brought. Yet even as the most powerful woman in the world, she could not escape the taboos of her time. No matter how refined or regal, her body followed nature's rhythm, and it had to be hidden behind silk and secrecy. The palace bathrooms, if they could be called that, were not designed for privacy or hygiene. In many royal residences, chamber pots were still the norm well into the 19th century. A maid, or necessary woman, would discreetly carry them away after use. During menstruation, these attendants played a crucial role, silently managing the evidence of their mistress's humanity. It was a job that came with shame and strict discretion. A single rumor about a queen's condition could spark gossip and damage her image. Royal women were expected to be symbols of divine grace, untouched by the crude realities of the body. Perfume became another weapon in this silent battle. Because washing during menstruation was discouraged, many believed it could cause illness or chill the blood. Royal women used heavy fragrances to mask odors. Musk, rosewater, and lavender were applied generously, not just on the skin but also on undergarments and even menstrual rags. The scent of a royal woman was meant to be intoxicating and pure, never betraying what lay beneath her corset. But for those who lived in these bodies, the experience was suffocating. Imagine being wrapped in tight fabric, sweating, bleeding, unable to bathe properly, breathing through clouds of perfume. It was elegance built on misery. Medical advice was often cruel. Doctors suggested avoiding physical activity, spicy food, or even reading during menstruation, claiming it could strain the female brain. For royals, this meant days of enforced idleness, trapped in their chambers while the world continued outside. Servants and attendants would know, of course, they always did. And yet no one would speak of it. The unspoken rule was clear: royal blood might flow through their veins, but the red blood of womanhood must never be seen. Some royal women tried to find discreet solutions. By the late 1800s, prototypes of menstrual sponges appeared. Natural sea sponges that could be inserted to absorb blood. They were uncomfortable and unhygienic by modern standards, but for desperate women, they offered a small degree of freedom. There were even rumors of homemade tampons made from rolled linen or cotton, tied with thread. However, such methods were considered scandalous and were rarely acknowledged publicly. The hypocrisy was striking. Royal physicians and advisors obsessed over a queen's fertility, her ability to produce heirs, yet they refused to discuss menstruation openly. Periods were a sign of fertility, but acknowledging them was considered indecent. So royal women lived in contradiction, their value tied to their wombs, yet their wombs' natural function cloaked in shame. Behind the glittering image of courtly life, menstruation shaped much of the rhythm of palace routines. Some historians believe that certain royal events were scheduled around the queen's cycle, ensuring she could appear radiant and energetic. But officially, this was never written down. The menstrual calendar of a monarch was as secret as matters of state. The physical toll was real. With poor hygiene, heavy clothing, and limited ventilation, infections were common. Sores, rashes, and even blood poisoning could occur. Some women used powders made of lead or starch to keep dry, unaware of the toxins they were absorbing. These poisons not only caused long-term health problems, but sometimes worsened menstrual pain and fatigue. And yet, all of it was endured in silence, because appearances mattered more than comfort. Imagine standing through hours of court balls or royal audiences, pretending to smile while cramps twist your stomach, and blood trickles down your legs under layers of brocade. There were no excuses, no rest days. A queen could not simply say she was in pain. Duty demanded perfection. Her suffering became part of the performance, invisible, unspoken, but constant. Over time, a strange culture of endurance developed. Royal women prided themselves on stoicism, on hiding discomfort so completely that no one could guess. Pain became a badge of dignity. The more gracefully they bore it, the more admirable they seemed. But underneath that polished mask, many broke down in private. Diaries, letters, and memoirs reveal a quiet desperation. Women who longed for rest, for honesty, for a moment of being human without judgment. As the 19th century ended, change began slowly. The rise of industrial manufacturing and the growing women's health movement introduced new menstrual products. In the 1880s, disposable pads made of absorbent cotton and gauze began appearing, though they were expensive and still considered improper to discuss. Royal women may have had access to these early products, but habits and taboos die hard. Even with innovation, silence remained. Menstruation was still a forbidden word in polite society. It wasn't until the 20th century that royalty and women everywhere began to speak openly about periods as a normal part of life. The long history of secrecy started to fade, but not without resistance. The old belief that dignity required denial lingered for generations. The ghosts of those corseted queens and princesses still haunt the way society views women as bodies today. The story of how royal women managed their periods under their puffy dresses is more than a tale of discomfort. It's a window into how culture, shame, and beauty standards can turn something natural into something painful. It shows how power and privilege could not protect women from the tyranny of their own image. They may have worn crowns, but even queens were prisoners of silence. When we look at portraits of royal women today, we see grace and majesty. But now perhaps we can see a little more. Beneath the jewels and lace was a human being, sweating, aching, bleeding, carrying the hidden burden of womanhood in a world that demanded perfection. The silence around their bodies was not their choice. It was imposed by a society terrified of female reality. Their endurance was not just royal decorum, it was survival. And so, behind every polished portrait and glittering crown, there was a truth that no one dared to paint. The red, hidden struggle that every royal woman endured under her puffy dress. It was the price of beauty, the cost of grace, and the secret history that history itself tried to forget.